believing in most of the policies of UKIP, I'm actually going to be voting for UKIP, both in the European elections and in next year's general election. The simple reason is that I was researching a video that I planned to do about Europe, and I found there are a lot of things that I hadn't realised about being a member of the European superstate. Now, if I was to ask you, for example, let's just talk about money for a minute. If I was to ask you, how much do you think it costs for the UK to be a member of the European state every hour? Have a think about that for a second. Every hour. Write it down. Now, do you want to know how much? Well, just the membership fee, we're looking at £2.29 million every single hour of every single day. Now that's just the membership fee. There are other costs to being in the EU. And if you take those into account, the cost soars to nearly £13 million an hour. Now what do we get out of this £13 million an hour? Actually not a lot. Yes, the EU do give us grants for various things, which kind of pays back some of our money, but when you look at the things those grants are spent on, they're really pretty irrelevant. Things like top business lunches in London hotels. Well, personally I think these businesses make enough to be able to afford them for themselves without everyone paying for them. It's ludicrous, really. Now, the amounts of money we're talking about here are horrendous. I mean, 55 million a day, and that's just the actual membership fee. Everything else, 323 million a day. You're talking about billions of pounds a year. Billions. Okay. Now think of what we could do with that money. Okay, if we weren't a member of the EU, now at the moment we're dismantling hospitals at the rate of about 4 or 5 a year. Well, we could actually afford to rebuild the National Health Service and do it properly. We could build, with the cost of £560 million for a hospital, we could build 35 new hospitals a year. 35. Okay, we could build 15 and run all the rest properly, for example. Now there are, in the UK, there's something like 2,090 families in bed and breakfast who are homeless. Well, within a few weeks we could actually give them houses, give them away. We might as well, we give the money away to the UK, to the EU. So why can't we give homeless families houses? Now, this is so silly, spending this amount of money and getting nothing. In fact, we get less than nothing. Let's carry on. While we're still in the financial arena, there are the corrupt practices that go on as part of the EU, and they admit themselves, they did a big investigation, £99 billion a year worth of corruption in the EU. Now I'm not suggesting our government is perfect, but 99 billion? That's like, yeah, well. And that's what they admit to. That's what they can easily find. Now, if you look at other corruption trials that have started with a low figure and ended up saying, oh my god, it's a lot worse than we thought, I would say that figure is between 10 and 15 times that. So you're talking more like 990 or maybe 1,000 billion pounds a year corruption in the EU. This is ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. So there's other problems with the EU. One of them is trading. When we originally joined the EU, what people voted on was the common market. I mean, this is the concept where all of the EU manufacturers would get together and look to export outside Europe, and costs would be shared, and everything in the garden was going to be rosy, and there weren't going to be any import duties between European countries. All well and good. Did that happen? Well, unfortunately, yes it did. Why do I say unfortunately? Because Britain and British companies can now no longer negotiate with countries outside the EU. We have to go, to make trade deals of any sort, we have to go cap in hand to the European Commission and say, please Mr. European Commission, can we actually do this deal with India or China or wherever it is? And they say, no, you can't negotiate, we have to do it for you. And needless to say, they screw it up, because of all these EU regulations about things like how straight a banana has to be. The actual chances of getting a trade agreement with any country outside the EU are very minimal, because the costs for them are huge, because they have to comply with all these EU regulations. Which brings me on to the next thing, the strangling of British industry. Now, when I was in the electronics industry, I used to run an R&D department which included a small chemistry lab. And the EU regulations made operating this lab pretty prohibitive. Everything was regulated. To give you an example, even water. If for this nasty H2O chemical I did not have a complete data sheet and complete traceability back to the manufacturer, or should I say the filterer, then I couldn't use it. And the same went for the rest of the factory. I mean, the thing is that the whole of Europe was supposed to work to these same standards. Now, when I went to see one of our suppliers and I looked at their laboratories in Holland, the whole place was upside down. We couldn't possibly run a laboratory like that. And I asked the guy who was my host, and he said, oh yeah, European regulations, we don't worry about those. And I said, well, doesn't anyone come around and inspect you? And he laughed and he said, well, we had an inspection 5 years ago. The guy came, somebody took him out to lunch, and he just went away again. And I was flabbergasted. See, the thing is that us British, we take things far too seriously, so compared to the Europeans. So when there's a regulation, not only do we stick to it, but our government sets up an entire department to make sure that that regulation is in fact adhered to. Now, the rest of the countries in Europe don't do this. So our industry was operating with prohibitive costs that the rest of Europe wasn't. And this is how British industry got strangled, quite apart from the Margaret Thatcher service economy thing of the 1980s, which was also a very bad idea, which I might get onto in another video. But our industry was completely strangled. Now, if we were to divert all the money that we currently spend on Europe, and yes we do spend it, we get so little of it back, it's incredible. We could build a new car factory every year, for example, and staff it, and design cars every year. Basically, with that money we could do things that the other countries don't want us to do, which is really to make Britain great again. So I regard it as being so urgent that we get out of Europe, especially when we're in the debt situation that we're in at the moment, that it's untrue. And the only party that I can see who might achieve this is, in fact, UKIP. Now, I know there's been promises about a referendum, okay? We've heard this before. Before every damn election, there's a promise about a referendum from somebody or other, or some group of politicians. So, what does this referendum mean that they're promising? Because they won't say, oh, it's a straightforward in-out referendum, but they don't say whether the results are going to be binding or not. I mean, look at the recent referendums in the Crimea. They're turning around and saying that these referendums are, oh no, they're not at all binding because they're illegal. And we have to bear in mind that in the EU, and we're in the EU now, that having a referendum about whether to actually stay in it is not really a legal act. It's not covered by the European Constitution, European rules. And that brings me on to another thing, which is the death of British politics, because if you look at all three of the main parties now, if you look at Labour, Conservative, Liberal, their policies, apart from some tiny little details, are nearly all the same. Why is this? It's because we're a member of Europe. We have lost control of our destiny. Their policies, because they all believe in Europe and they all want to stay members of Europe, there's a reason for that. It might not be entirely unrelated to the 100 billion or so corruption, but they all want to stay in, and so they have to toe the European line that they are being dictated to by Brussels, effectively. If they know there's a European regulation in the pipeline about unemployment or any other factor, they have to put that in their policies, because otherwise, if they go against it, then as soon as they've been elected, bang, everyone says, oh, you promised such and such, you're not doing it. Well, too true they're not, because the EC won't let them. We are effectively no longer a sovereign country. We are a sovereign country who has a sovereign, Queen Elizabeth, but the country's not a sovereign country, so she's obviously not a sovereign. So it's absolutely essential we get out of the EU. Let me reiterate some of the things we could afford. Okay. Now, we could afford new hospitals, we could afford new schools, we could afford to house people that are homeless, we could afford to restock the council housing, which got decimated by Right to Buy. We could afford to boost our industry to the extent that we would once again become an industrial leader in the world. People don't want this. People outside the UK don't want this. We could get full employment in the UK. It would not be a big problem with that amount of money. Hell, if we wanted to, we could have our own space program. We could put a space station up. The space station only cost around about £7 billion to put up there. Now, we could put a brand new shiny space station up there. In fact, we could probably do a couple a year. This is how ridiculous this situation is. Where our money goes, it goes in agricultural subsidies. That's a huge amount of it goes in agricultural subsidies. It gets wasted on dinners. It gets spent by politicians in expenses. And MEP expenses, believe you me, are huge. I mean, there is a complaint about UKIP politicians that they don't attend the EU Parliament enough. Well, I'm sorry, that's not a complaint. A, they're anti-Europe, so would you expect them to? B, they get paid every time they go. Now, if they were money-grubbing politicians like the rest of the EU Parliament, who turn up for every meeting, you look at the Labour Euro MPs and the Conservative MPs, yeah, they turn up for every single meeting, and they damn well get paid for it, and they claim huge amounts of expenses for it as well. UKIP, they don't turn up that often. When they do, they make an impact, and they don't cost the country and Europe so much either. The whole system of politics in this country is wrong. I'll probably do another video about that, but there we go. So that's why I'm voting UKIP in both the European elections and the general elections, and I hope you'll all join me. If you don't believe what I say, just do the research yourself. Everything's online. Some of it's even on the European Union website. So, see you later.